Hi, my name is Luna. And the day I walked into that glass tower in downtown Chicago, I didn't know I was walking straight into a storm I thought I had outgrown. I was there for a job interview, a chance I'd been chasing for years. I wore my cleanest blazer, the one I had ironed 3 times just to smooth out the doubts. My resume was tucked inside a soft leather folder, the corners a little bent from how often I'd pulled it out. Read it. Repacked it. The lobby of Vector Course Systems was like something out of a science fiction film. Glass walls, brushed metal beams, abstract lights that felt colder than they looked. Every movement echoed. You could hear ambition in the air. And anxiety. I adjusted my posture and walked up to the reception desk. Luna Avery. Here for the 11 a.m. panel, I said. The receptionist nodded politely, handed me a temporary badge, and gestured toward the 22nd floor. The elevator hummed up through steel and sky. When it opened, I stepped into a waiting room where a few other candidates were already seated. They looked like they'd walked off the cover of Wired fitted suits. Sleek laptops, business cards made of textured matte stock. Me, I had thrifted heels, calloused palms, and 5 years of freelance consulting in the shadows of real names. I smiled at a woman in a pale blue blazer. She didn't smile back. There was one seat left, slightly off-center, next to the coat rack, the kind of seat that feels like someone left it open on purpose for someone who wasn't quite part of the circle. I sat down quietly. The room buzzed with the hush of tension and corporate rehearsals. That was when the door opened, and Sloane Avery walked in. My sister, in heels sharp enough to scratch marble, hair pulled into a twist that screamed power ever doozer. She didn't even flinch when our eyes met. No nod. No, hey. No trace of recognition. She walked straight to the far end of the room and took her place not in the lineup of candidates, but behind the interview panel table. One of them. My throat closed. 7 years. 7 years since our last shared conversation that didn't end in silence. I had no idea she worked here. Or maybe, somewhere deep down, I had hoped she didn't. The other panelists began their introductions. HR buzzwords filled the air like polite landmines. Synergy, scalability, culture fit. I tried to focus. I really did. An assistant offered coffee around. Everyone got a cup. Except me. Sloane sipped her own and whispered something to the woman beside her. They both chuckled. I didn't need to hear it. I'd heard that tone since I was 11. Dismissive. Sweetened with superiority. I kept my eyes on the table. I thought of late nights stitching broken code, of learning AI framework design while my ex said it was a cute hobby, of showing Sloane my first startup pitch deck and then watching her present the same idea to her company a month later. Back then, I thought betrayal needed blood. Turns out, it just needs someone you trust to smile when the credit goes to them. They called names. One by one. The other candidates stood up, introduced themselves, talked about their time at Stanford, their mentorships, their internships at Apple or Meta. Sloane nodded, took notes, smiled. Then they called my name. She didn't even look up. I placed my resume gently on the table in front of her. She slid it sideways without reading it like it was a menu for someone else's table. I sat down again. Heart pounding, but face still. Behind me, someone coughed. I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. And just like that, I wasn't her sister anymore. I wasn't anyone. Not yet. But what none of them knew, what Sloane had forgotten, was that I had already survived being erased. And this time, I hadn't come to ask for permission. The moment the elevator doors closed behind me, I could finally breathe. I didn't cry. I didn't storm out. I didn't break anything. I just walked. Down the street. Past the traffic. Past the blur of faces. My resume still in my hand, creased now. Just like the hope I'd ironed flat that morning. It was barely noon. But Chicago had that sharp, gray spring air that makes your jacket feel thinner than it should. I ducked into a little indie cafe near Wells and Kinsey. The kind with exposed brick, handwritten chalk menus, and a permanent smell of burnt espresso and deadlines. I ordered a cold brew I wouldn't drink just to justify sitting in the back corner. And then I sat quiet, still. My fingers traced the folder in my lap like it might come alive if I held it long enough. Red ink. Unqualified. She didn't even say it out loud. But somehow it screamed louder than anything else in that room. And I kept thinking, why am I surprised? Because this wasn't the first time. Not even close. Flashback. Age 24. My first full-time offer was almost mine. I'd spent 3 months freelancing for a nonprofit AI integration project. I'd designed a streamlined ethics model for machine learning audits, something that could have made real impact. I was so proud. I shared it with Sloane. Over wine. On her balcony. She said she was impressed. And then, a week later, and the boutique firm she consulted for launched a remarkably similar proposal. Same language. Same core structure. Same rollout plan. Sloane didn't deny it. Didn't even flinch. I didn't say it was mine, she said with a shrug. But I also didn't say it wasn't. She smiled when she said it like it was a game we were both in on. The job went to some guy she referred. And I was left explaining to the board why my design looked like a copy of something I hadn't even seen. That night, at a family dinner, Dad raised a glass. To my daughters. He said, Sloane the strategist, and Luna, always the kind one. Not smart. Not driven. Not capable. Kind. The word stuck to me like syrup. Sweet. Sticky. And impossible to shake. Back in the present, I stared out the cafe window at the taxis and crosswalks. I pulled out my phone. There was a message from Carter. Hey. How'd it go? I stared at the screen. Typed she made sure I failed. Then deleted it. Typed again, they tore it up in front of me. Deleted that too. I could have sent it. Could have unloaded the weight onto someone else. But that would have made her the author again. Her Version. Her power. Her ending. I typed one word instead. Fine. I sat there longer than I should have. The cold brew went untouched. My chest was tight, but my shoulders stayed square. I wasn't done. I stood up, picked up the resume, pressed out the crease with the flat of my hand, and walked back out into the cold. Not with hope, but with decision. I walked back into the building like I belonged there. Not because they invited me back, not because they asked me to, but because they hadn't finished reading my story and I wasn't going to let them write the ending. The security guard at the front desk blinked when he saw me. Didn't they? I'm here for the open assessment round, I said. Voice steady. He paused for a moment, hand hovering over the phone. Maybe he saw something in my eyes, something sharper than before. He picked up the receiver. 1 moment. 2 minutes later, I was back in the elevator. Same floors. Same nerves. But not the same Luna. When the doors opened, the panel was still there. Greg Delaney glanced up, then leaned back in his chair with a smirk that tried too hard. Well, look who couldn't stay away. Sloane didn't even turn fully toward me. Changed your mind, she asked. Already amused. You never were great at letting things go. I didn't answer. I walked to the only empty chair, the one they hadn't offered earlier, and pulled it out myself. I sat. Not as a guest. Not as a sister. As a storm they didn't see coming. Greg tapped his pen against his notepad. All right. If you're so eager to prove yourself, he said. Let's put that brain to use. He nodded at the assistant, who brought over a thick packet and dropped it in front of me like a gauntlet. Paper only. No calculator. No laptop. Just you and a pen. How long do I have? I asked. 15 minutes. He grinned. No talking. And no clarifications. The test was brutal. Logic chains. System diagrams. Algorithm breakdowns twisted like puzzles designed to make you fail fast. They wanted to break me. Not just evaluate me. Fine. I flipped to the first page and started writing. The air in the room shifted. I could feel their eyes on me. One candidate sneezed. Someone sipped coffee. I heard the subtle squeak of Sloane's leather chair as she leaned toward the woman next to her and whispered something. I didn't look up. I didn't need to. I already knew what that smirk looked like. When I reached the last question, my wrist ached. But I didn't pause. No crossouts. No second guesses. No panits. I pushed the packet across the table. Greg picked it up slowly, as if it offended him. He didn't read it. He ripped it in half, page by page, until it was nothing but fluttering scraps falling into the trash can beside him. Incredible penmanship, he said dryly. But we don't hire fiction writers. There was laughter. Quiet. Cruel. From the far end of the table, I didn't react. I didn't cry. Didn't flinch. Didn't curse. Instead, I stood. Walked over to the trash can. And knelt. One by one. I picked up the torn pages, not to salvage them. Not for proof. But because I wanted to remember exactly how this felt. What dismissal looks like when it stops hurting and starts revealing avarice. Someone behind me cleared their throat. Uncomfortable. But no one stopped me. Then, just as I reached for the final piece, a sharp heel pinned it down. Sloane. She leaned slightly. Voice barely above a whisper, but aimed to cut. Still crawling for approval. Luna, I looked up. She expected shame. Tears. Maybe. What she saw instead was the beginning of something far more dangerous. I smiled. Then stood. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel beneath her. I didn't remember leaving the room. Only the sound of my own heels hitting polished tile. One. Then another. Like punctuation marks after a sentence no one believed I had the right to write. I ended up in the restroom. The kind with floor-to-ceiling mirrors and marble countertops so pristine they dared you to break down. I gripped the edge of the sink. Looked in the mirror. No tears. But my mascara had started to smudge. I splashed cold water on my face and let the silence wrap around me. And then I heard it. Laughter. The door creaked open and 2 interns walked in young. Polished. Still carrying that startup girl sparkle. They were mid-conversation. Not noticing I was in the corner. She really bombed it. One of them said, adjusting her ponytail. The other snorted, Greg literally tore it up in front of everyone. Like. Ripped it. Paper snowstorm. She just picked it all up. The first one said, like a kicked poopy. They both giggled. Then one added, wasn't that the one Sloane said was, like? Her cousin or something, or distant relative. She didn't look like family. They left before the silence could answer them. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching myself, watching the version of me they saw. I could still hear Sloane's voice from earlier, dripping with false sweetness, still crawling for approval. Luna, and suddenly, I didn't feel sad. I felt done. By the time I stepped back into the hallway, I wasn't holding shame anymore. I was holding fire. I paused near the glass balcony that overlooked the building's reception area. That's when I saw her. A young woman, maybe 25. Hair pinned back too tight? Hands clutched around a resume like it was the last thing tethering her to belief. She stood alone near the security gate, clearly waiting for someone to call her name. A man brushed past her without looking. Her shoulders dropped, eyes dimmed, until they found mine. We held each other's gaze for a second too long. She didn't smile, but her grip loosened on the folder in her hands. Just slightly. In that moment, I saw it clearly. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about proving anything to Sloane, or Greg, or the suits in the panel room. It was about showing up for the version of me who once stood exactly where that girl stood now. Frozen. Small. Waiting to be allowed in. And it hit me. I had spent so much of my life contorting to fit into spaces where no one ever planned to make room. Changing my tone. Shrinking my resume. Softening my voice just enough so it didn't scare the room. For what? So I could be told I was almost enough? No. No more folding myself to fit. No more rehearsing for applause. I didn't need. That wasn't strength. That was survival. And I was done surviving. I turned away from the balcony. The girl still stood below. Still clutching her papers. Still waiting. But I didn't wait anymore. My steps were slower now, but more grounded. I walked back toward the receptionist's desk. She blinked in surprise. Miss Avery. You're back again. I need to speak to the panel. I said. She looked hesitant. They're in the middle of internal review. I know. I said. That's why I'm here. Something about the way I said it made her pick up the phone without another word. And this time, they didn't make me wait. They didn't expect to see me again. When I stepped back into the conference room, no one stood. No one smiled. Greg raised an eyebrow. Pen frozen midair. Forget something. Sloane let out a soft laugh under her breath. You really don't know when to quit. Do you? I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I placed a slim black folder on the glass table. Not too hard. Not too soft. I'm not here to beg. I said. I came because you left something out. Laura, one of the panelists, tilted her head. Left out. My record. My work. The truth? Greg exhaled. Annoyed. We're in the middle of a closed session. And that's when the door behind me opened. He walked in without a word. Carter Malone. In a black suit. No tie. Cool as stone. There was a sharpness to him, not aggressive, but exact, like someone who had walked through fire and now just lit candles with what was left. The air shifted. Every back straightened. Every eye widened. Even Sloane froze. Mr. Malone. Greg stammered. Already standing. We didn't know you were. I wasn't supposed to be. Carter said. But then I got an alert. He turned to me and gently asked, Are you okay? I nodded. Once, he looked back at the panel. Interesting. He said, Some of you seem to know me very well, but you clearly didn't know her. He opened the black folder I'd set down and began laying out pages one by one. Luna Avery, he said, his voice calm but cutting. Freelance architect on 3 of our internal systems. contributor to our AI ethics compliance model in 2021. The white-labeled framework you presented to stakeholders last quarter, she co-authored it. Greg turned pale. Carter slid a printed report across the table. Metrics from the last 2 quarters. 19% increase in efficiency. That bump wasn't luck, it was Luna's work. Just never signed under her name. Laura looked down. Then back up at me. Why, didn't we see any of this? Because you didn't look, I said. And someone made sure you wouldn't. I turned to Sloane. She said nothing. But her silence cracked like glass. Carter continued. There's more, he said. Voice level. An internal audit from the 2019 application cycle. He pulled another sheet from the folder, an HR log file with metadata. Review notes for Luna's application were altered. Phrases like unpredictable collaboration, not a cultural fit, and resistant to feedback. These weren't from her reviewers. They were entered under a system login traced to he paused. Then turned his gaze slowly. Sloane Avery. You could have heard a pin drop. Greg pushed his chair back, like he wanted to disappear. Laura's eyes darted away. Sloane finally found her voice. I was trying to protect the company from nepotism. From any perception, the only nepotism here, I said quietly. Was you protecting yourself from being compared to someone you never thought would rise? Her mouth parted. But no sound followed. Carter stepped aside and nodded toward the legal advisor seated on the video call. We have every reason, he said, to initiate an immediate review of interview conduct, ethics compliance, and possible retaliation. Greg started to speak, but Laura cut in. This isn't just bias, she said. This is a liability. Sloane snapped. She planned this. She wanted it to fall apart in front of everyone. This is manipulation. No one responded. And that silence. That was the sound of truth finally outranking power. I stepped forward. I was never here to take something from anyone. I said, I showed up because I knew I had value. I turned to Sloane. Voice low and steady. And now, so do they. Sloane's mouth tightened into a smirk, but it didn't reach her eyes. You all think this is about her being some unsung genius, she barked. You're missing the bigger picture. She manipulated this entire thing. She timed it. She staged it. No. I cut in. Calm as ever. I just stopped playing the role you wrote for me. She laughed once. Sharp and humorless. Oh. Come on. I introduced you to him. She hissed, pointing at Carter. You think this is about merit. You only got here because I opened the damn door. Carter's face didn't change. Not even a blink. Yes. I said quietly. You introduced me. And when he chose me, you made sure no one else did. The room dropped into silence again. For the first time, it wasn't about guilt. It was about clarity. Carter turned to her. Slowly. So you admit it, he asked. You interfered with internal referrals, tampered with candidate reviews, and deliberately obscured project contributions. I protected the company from conflict of interest, Sloane shouted, her voice rising. From perception issues, from being accused of favoritism, the only person you protected, I said, was yourself. You didn't want anyone to see the cracks in your crown. No one said a word, even Laura, who had earlier giggled with Sloane over coffee, quietly slid her notepad away like it had burned her fingers. Greg looked down at his hands. The legal advisor on the video call leaned in. I recommend immediate administrative leave pending a full HR and compliance investigation. But Carter, he didn't flinch. He opened a final folder. There's one more thing, he said. Sloane stiffened. What now, this? He said, placing a printed server log on the table. Is from our internal IT team. A screenshot of a forged email, a message sent to a client 2 weeks earlier. Under my name. Calling a potential partner a disaster in heels. It had my email signature, my style, even my tag. But the server showed the email originated from Sloane's IP address logged into an admin panel she wasn't authorized to access anymore. Sloane's face drained of color. That's ridiculous, she said, reaching for the paper. Carter pulled it back. Forging internal credentials to defame an employee is more than unethical. Sloane's voice cracked. You think you're better than me now just because he picked you? I didn't raise my voice. I didn't blink. No, I said. I'm just done being beneath you. That broke her. She stood up fast, her chair screeching behind her. This is a setup. Security had already been called. She tried one last time. She's not innocent. Look at everything she's done. Look at this team. Look at this company. She doesn't belong here, but no one joined her chorus. Not this time. As the guards approached, she looked around desperate for someone to stop it. But there was only silence. The kind that doesn't scream or scold, just lets the truth echo. She was escorted out. Not by force, but by finality. After she left, no one spoke for a while. Then Carter cleared his throat. I moved to reinstate Luna Avery, he said. Effective immediately. The HR director added, and assign her to lead internal AI strategy over the very systems she quietly built. All in favor, he asked. Every hand went up. Even Laura's. Even Greg's. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just exhaled. Not from relief, but from release. The weight that had sat on my shoulders for years wasn't gone, but it had shifted. It wasn't shame anymore. It was power. Quiet. Earned. And mine? The next morning, I arrived early. Not out of habit. Out of intention. The HR director offered me Sloane's old office, the one with the skyline view, leather furniture, a wall full of accolades that now felt like props. But I shook my head. I'd rather sit near the dev floor. I said, closer to the work, closer to the people building things. There was a pause. Then a quiet nod. My new space was smaller, sunlit, lined with whiteboards full of half-born ideas. The air smelled like lemon cleaner and new beginnings. I set my bag down, pulled open the top drawer, and carefully unfolded the torn resume. The one Greg had ripped. I taped it back together and pinned it to the corkboard above my desk. Not as a trophy. Not as a wound. But as a receipt for every silent lesson I had paid for. In time. In trust. In every room that underestimated me. A few hours later, I was heading toward the break room when I saw her. The girl from the hallway. She looked different this time. Shoulders straighter. Eyes clearer. They called me back. She said breathlessly. For the role. The one you said I should apply for. Good. I said, locking eyes with her. You deserve it. She smiled. One of those real ones where you can tell someone finally started believing in themselves again. And just like that, I saw what all of this had really been for. Later that day, my phone buzzed. A message from my father. I didn't see everything before. I'm sorry. I stared at it for a full minute, then set the phone down without replying. Not out of anger. Out of clarity. Some bridges aren't meant to burn. But they're not meant to be rebuilt either. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, golden light spilled across my corkboard. It hit the torn resume. catching the frayed edges like threads in a tapestry. And that's when I realized something. Sloane was never the mountain. She was just the shadow. And I'd spent years trying to bloom in her shade, asking for light she never intended to share. But I didn't need her spotlight. I'd learned how to build my own window. Before I left for the evening, I pinned one last thing next to the resume. A wrinkled napkin from 3 years ago. The back had a quote I scribbled after my first failed client pitch. It said, "No one sees the quiet builder until the building outlasts the storm." I stood there for a long moment. Yes, still. Because sometimes, success doesn't come with applause. It comes with quiet, with stillness, with the peace of knowing you didn't become someone else to finally be seen. You just stopped waiting for permission. If you've ever been told you're not quite right, not polished enough, not loud enough, not born into the right room, let me say this: you don't need their approval. You just need your own. Build your own table. And when you do leave a chair open, someone else might be watching, holding their breath, hoping it's finally safe to sit down.